to continue on, inshallah, this chapter is a very important chapter because he clarifies a lot of, or rather a section within the book. It's a chapter within the book of knowledge. So one of the things that he says, he actually begins this book with a hadith from Imam al-Bayhaqi, and also Ibn Abd al-Barr mentions it. So in light of some of you attended the Qigong session. The Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, "Utlub al-ilm walaw fi as-Sin." Seek knowledge even walaw bis-Sin. Seek knowledge even to China. And the ulama, they said, "Al-hikmatu nazarat ala thalatha." Wisdom has descended upon 3 civilizations: the aid ahl al-Sin, the hands of the Chinese, wa admighat al-Yunaniyin, and the intellects of the Greeks. But really it's that whole beginning in India, because the Greeks are actually part of the Indo-European, wa alsinat al-Arab, and the tongues of the Arabs. So he mentions that hadith because the Muslims, they took knowledge. They were very syncretic in their approach to knowledge. If they found knowledge that was useful or beneficial, they would take that knowledge where they found it. So if they borrowed from Greek medicine, they borrowed from Chinese medicine, they borrowed from Ayurvedic medicine. They also developed their own theories about medicine. And they certainly borrowed from Greek logic. There's influence from the Nagarjunan logic as well. You can see some of the influence in the Ash'ari positions that are clearly taken out of Buddhist tradition. A lot of the Buddhist logicians from Balkh and Herat and these great Buddhist centers that were in Afghanistan, they became Muslim. And so they brought a lot of their tools with them into the religion. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min." The wisdom is the lost property of a believer. So wherever he finds it, he has more right to that. So he mentions, one of the things that he does in here is he talks about the fact that the fuqaha, he says the fuqaha they're really people of worldly knowledge. In fact, one of the things that he says in this very chapter, he says, وَقَدْ كَانَ سُفْيَانَ الثَّوْرِي وَهُوَ إِمَامٌ فِي عِلْمِ الظَّاهِرِ يَقُولُ إِنَّ طَلَبَ هَذَا لَيْسَ مِنْ زَادِ الْآخِرَةِ Sufyan al-Thawri, one of the great fuqaha and mujtahid mutlaq. He was an independent jurist, had his own madhab. He said that seeking this knowledge is not provision for the akhirah. And part of the reason that he said that, and Imam al-Ghazali elaborates considerably, but part of the reason he said that is because that fiqh or jurisprudence was something that enabled you to get jobs in the government. It enables you to become a qadi, a judge. There were a lot of societal perquisites for learning it and studying it. And so the fuqaha, the jurists, then had a lot of pitfalls that were very difficult to avoid. And he goes into that. But what he says, he said, وَمَنْ تَعَلَّمَ, this is Imam al-Ghazali, وَمَنْ تَعَلَّمَ هَذِهِ الْأُمُورَ لِيَتَقَرَّبِ بِتَعَاطِيهَا إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَهُوَ مَجْنُونَ. If you learn these fiqh or jurisprudence, and he's not talking about your ibadah, he's really talking about all of the fard kifaya, the collective obligations that enable people to become judges. He said, if you learn that as a way to draw near to God, then you're mad. Whoever does that is mad. This was the reason, this statement, there's another statement also, but this was one of the primary reasons why they burnt the book in Andalusia during his lifetime. It was literally burnt publicly. It wasn't the best of times for difference of opinion. The Andalusians were very, very staunch Maliki. They were also Athari. They were not Ash'ari at that time. In fact, the Western Islam adopts the Ash'ari creed because of one of the students of Imam al-Ghazali, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. Also Ibn Turmut, who was, he's a problematic figure, but he also had some influence in that. So that's what he said. He said, إنما العمل بالقلب والجوارح في الطاعات والشرف هو علم تلك الأعمال. What will get you near to God is those things, the actions that are going to purify your heart and obedience of your limbs and the honor of that. That's the real honor. So he says, if you say, and this is one of his techniques in the book, he preempts his critics. So he will say, فَإِن قُلْتَ, you might disagree and say, how can you put fiqh and medicine, jurisprudence and medicine at the same level? Because he earlier says that medicine is a worldly science also. And then, so he says, when we know that medicine is for the health of the body, and whereas fiqh, jurisprudence, is for the health of the soul. So he says, I'm not equating them. It's not a necessary equation. There's definitely a difference between them. Jurisprudence is more honorable, and he gives reasons for it. For instance, it's a sacred science, although medicine has a sacred component to it, certainly, and he considered it to be from the fara'id al-kifaya, a collective obligation. But he's saying that the Prophet did not come as a healer of the bodies. Ibn Khaldun in the Muqaddimah says, the Prophet ﷺ didn't come to teach us medicine, but he brought the principles of medicine. In fact, in the verse in the Quran, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. Eat and drink, but not to excess. One of the Greek physicians in Alexandria, I think, or one of the Egyptian towns, when he heard that, he said, مَا تَرَكَ نَبِيُّكَ, I mean, it's from the Quran, but he said, مَا تَرَكَ نَبِيُّكَ شَيْئًا لِجَالِنُوس. You know, that your Prophet didn't leave anything for Galen, because so much of sickness is from overeating, taking more calories than you need. So when it says eat and drink but not to excess, if you're not excessive in your food and drink, then your body will be healthy. So he says that that fiqh, the second reason that it's more honorable, is that people that are seeking the next world have to have ways of doing that. Whereas medicine is something that the only people that need it are the sick people. If you're healthy, and there's people that go through life, they don't ever need a doctor. I mean, there are many places where there aren't doctors. I've lived in places where there's no doctors. Tuaymarat in Mauritania in the Sahara. If you got sick, you either died or you got well. There's no 911 or no ambulance is going to come get you. And unfortunately, in a lot of places, simply because they don't know about massaging the fundus and things after childbirth, women bleed out and die from things that are easily remedied with a little bit of midwifery and knowledge. So he says that you don't need a doctor except the sick people, whereas with fiqh, you need it. Whether you're sick or well, you need to know how to behave. And then he says, and the third reason is that fiqh really is the outward fiqh is necessary and complements the inward fiqh, which is the purpose. And this is why tasawwuf, Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, who I mentioned yesterday, tasawwuf was traditionally considered fiqh al-batin. Just like you have fiqh al-zahir, they considered tasawwuf to be fiqh al-batin. It was simply the fiqh of the internal states, just as the jurisprudence is the fiqh of the outward states. It's the jurisprudence of your outward states. So you need to know, for instance, if you're going to get married, what are the arkan of marriage? What are the foundations of it? You have to have, obviously, you have to have the male and the female, so that's important. I mean, some people debate that today, but in our tradition, you have to have the male and the female, and then you have to have the wali, according to the three. Abu Hanifa allows for certain women to take care of their own. They can be their own wali. You have to have a sadaq. There has to be some type of exchange. You have to have the sigha. You have to have some type of marriage ceremony in which one says, the wali says, I give this woman in marriage to you, and the man says, qabilta, I accept it. So you have to have that. And then you have to have witnesses. So that's the fiqh. But what do you do when there's problems in the marriage? What do you do when the hearts aren't right in the marriage? The faqih can't do a whole lot there. He can tell you, okay, here's the haqq and here's, but if the woman is always harassing the husband, or the husband is violent with the woman, the faqih can say, يَحْرُمُ عَلَيْكَ ضَرْبُهَا. It's prohibited to strike her. He probably knows that already, maybe not, because unfortunately some Muslims are under the mistaken assumption that somehow domestic violence is their prerogative as a male. But no faqih has ever said that in the history of Islam. It's not permitted to be violent with women. You can't hit an animal in any way that would harm the animal. So it's not really conducive to love in a relationship. So what happens though when his anger is like that? Well, there you need, لَيْسَ هَذَا طِبُّ جَالِنُوس وَإِنَّمَا يَخْتَصُ بِالنُّفُوسِ. This isn't the medicine of Galen. This is psychology. So now you need the psychologist, which is traditionally what the Shaykh or the Murabbi was. He was basically what we would call today a psychologist. And so that knowledge was very important to understand the nafs, the nature. For instance, Imam al-Ghazali says in another part in the Ihya about raising children, he said nobody should raise children that is unaware of the temperament of children, because human beings have temperament, and this was what you were given. Now, the best people are balanced people, but most people have, in traditional medicine, they have temperaments. So they have excessive heat, or they have excessive coldness, or they're hot or wet. And so those imbalances in what were called traditionally the akhlaq or the humors, I mean, a lot of people don't accept this anymore, but whether or not the humors are actual substances like black bile and yellow bile and blood and choler and phlegm, right? Whether these are accurate descriptions or not, most modern physicians would reject them. But the reality of the temperaments is real. In fact, the Myers-Briggs personality assessments correspond very closely with these traditional and ancient temperaments. Ibn Sina developed the psychology of the temperaments far beyond what Galen had done. So Imam al-Ghazali says it's important to know that, to know the temperament of a child, because if you're choleric, Safrawi, you're going to be inclined to get angry easier because you're hot and you're dry. And foods that are hot and dry are going to exacerbate your symptoms. And so there's a way to treat that just in diet. There's a way to treat it also in knowledge of self-knowledge, knowing that people get angry easier than other people. The Sawdawi, which is a melancholic personality, is cold and dry. And these are people that incline towards depression. Their anger tends to go inward as opposed to outward. The choleric, and they're related, the choleric and the melancholic. but the choleric will express it outwardly, inwardly, whereas the choleric will express it outwardly, the melancholic inwardly. So knowing that about yourself, that you incline towards a melancholic temperament, will help in understanding why, for instance, certain things affect you. If your spouse has that temperament, then that helps a lot to understand that, because you need to treat them in a different way. A sanguine temperament, which is hot and wet, and that temperament is, they're not affected by things. They're like water off the back. They're more cheerful. That we call it sanguine. These are words that are still remnants of this tradition in Western civilization. You know, phlegmatic person, a melancholic person. He's got a lot of bile. I mean, that's the choleric personality. And then sanguine means cheerful. So these, and then people have underlying, they have a dominant temperament, they have an underlying temperament. That's a very useful knowledge, Imam al-Ghazali says, to know the personality. So teachers should know what they're dealing with their students, because how you treat them is going to affect them. What you say to a melancholic person might have a far more lasting impression than, say, to a sanguine person. You actually harm them without knowing. And I heard Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya once say that أكثر المشاكل في العالم الأمزجة. Most of the world's problems are a result of temperament, just people's temperaments, because they don't understand themselves. So you have all these people out there that are just angry. They don't understand that they've actually got a temperament problem. You know, like we have children that have temper tantrums. We've got all these adults that have temper tantrums. You know, road rage is clearly choleric personality. Not everybody will do that, but a choleric person will do that. And if they understand that, then you can get to anger management, because choleric people need anger management. And the Prophet ﷺ gave us anger management. He said, for instance, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you get angry and you're standing up, sit down. Right? Because it's heat. Heat rises, so go against it. He said, if you're still angry, lie down. And then another time he said, go and do wudu. Like put water on yourself to calm yourself down. So if you're in the midst of an argument, you shouldn't be arguing, but if you're in the midst of an argument and you're standing up, sit down. If that still doesn't work, lie down. It'll end the argument, I guarantee you. Guy will think you're nuts and he'll walk away. But people need to practice these things, really, if they want to overcome their selves. So, I haven't read this for a while, so very next sentence. وَأَمَّا الصِّحَّةُ وَالْمَرَضُ فَمَنْشَأُهُمَا صِفَاتٌ فِي الْمِزَاجِ وَالْأَخْلَاقِ. I really didn't know that was coming. MashaAllah. As for sickness and health, these are attributes of temperament and humors. وَذَلِكَ مِنْ أَوْصَافِ الْبَدَنِ لَا مِنْ أَوْصَافِ الْقَلْبِ. So it's the nature of it's the influence, because we believe in a holomorphic body. You know, we actually believe that the body and the soul, we're not Cartesian. We don't believe in this separation of the ghost in the machine. We actually believe that there is a profound relationship, which is why our worship is in the body. This is why we believe in the bodily resurrection. So the body is very important to us, and taking care of the body is important to us. And the body will affect the soul, and the soul in turn also will affect the body. So these are important points about that. So that's what he's saying. So he says, فَمَهْمَا أُضِيفَ الْفِقْهُ إِلَى الطِّبِّ ظَهَرَ شَرَفُهُ. So when this fiqh is added to medicine, you will see even more sharaf, more honor. وَإِذَا أُضِيفُ عِلْمُ الطَّرِيقِ الْآخِرَةِ إِلَى الْفِقْهِ ظَهَرَ أَيْضًا شَرَفُ عِلْمُ الطَّرِيقِ الْآخِرَةِ. And if you add knowledge of the next world to fiqh, then you will see even more. And this is why traditionally the ulama were also doctors. They studied the humors, they understood people, they studied psychology. It was very important for them to understand the nature. Much of the sickness that we see today, the depression that people have, is because they're connected to all these machines all the time, and which are having a negative effect on people. And because don't forget, those are radiation, they're literally dabdabat, there's vibrations coming out, they're affecting the brain, and the brain synchronizes with them. And then people don't go out in nature anymore. They don't look at nature. They don't experience nature. They don't breathe properly. They don't exercise. All of these things have an effect on us. And so a lot of people are actually very depressed simply because they're not taking care of their bodies. There's a lot of people sick for that reason. And that's why it's very important in our tradition to take care of the body. The Prophet ﷺ, in fact, in Imam Dhahabi's Tibb al-Nabawi, he says that in one riwayah, it said that his kitchen was like an apothecary because he had so many herbs and different things brewing at different times. And Aisha was asked, how did you learn knowledge of medicine? Her cousin asked her, how did you learn this knowledge of medicine so adeptly? And she said, I used to listen to the conversations of the Prophet ﷺ with the physicians. And we have an amazing hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, a man came to him and complained of his chest. And the Prophet put his hand on his chest and he said, Innaka maf'ud, you've got some heart disease. And he said, Ilhaq bil-Harith al-Karada, go to al-Harith al-Karada because innahu yatatabbab, because he's a physician. So that's an example of the Prophet doing literally like a diagnostic scanning with his hand, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then giving a reference, referring him to a specialist. Amazing hadith. But Aisha radiallahu anha knew medicine very well. And the Prophet ﷺ gave us very profound medical advice. And there are hadiths indicating that people should move. Sayyidina Umar said, قِلَّةُ الْحَرَكَةِ تَعْقِلُ الْبَدَنِ. Not moving enough will create blockage in the body. And he said also, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, لا ترموا النخالة فإنها من الطعام. Don't throw the bran away, the fiber, because it's part of the food. Refined food, in other words. What people eat today, they're sick. We get all these diseases that they don't need. The Prophet ﷺ said one of the signs of the end of time is, he said, تظهر البواسير. You will see hemorrhoids widespread. Why? That's not a disease of places where people move a lot. It's a disease of stagnation, where people are sitting too much, where they're not actually moving, they're not actually involved. So it's very important to remember those things, that this is part of being well in your body. Your body has rights over you. إِنَّ لِبَدْنِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقٍّ. Your body has a right over you, to take care of it, to exercise it. And it should last, if you take care of it. People, it's amazing, like people, they eat terribly, they never exercise, and then they get a disease that is a result of their lifestyle, and then قَدَّرُ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. MashaAllah. Ibtila. This is the way they look at it. It's just ibtila from God. No, it's an ibtila from your lifestyle. The way that you have lived has resulted in this. Don't blame God. Right? Take care of yourself. And then if you're doing all the things that you should be doing, and you still get that, then that's a ibtila. But if you're not taking care of yourself, don't blame anybody but yourself. So then he says, now this is really important because we're getting to the فإن قلت فصل لي علم طريق الآخرة تفصيلا. Clarify to me in detail, what is this path of the akhirah that you're talking about? فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ قِسْمًا. Know that it has two categories. علم مكاشفة وعلم معاملة. In the translation, he interprets it as the knowledge of revelation, which is not that. It's the knowledge of unveiling or inspiration that comes. Mukashafa is the unveilings that occur to the heart, that these are tajalliyat. And the second is ilm mu'amala. So the first category, ilm al-mukashafa, is the knowledge of the inward, ilm al-batin. It's the knowledge of the inward. وَذَلِكَ غَايَةَ الْعُلُومِ. This is really the aim and purpose of all knowledges. All sciences, the aim and purpose of them is to understand the inward realities. These are the first causes. This is what true understanding is, to understand the first causes behind things. And the first causes are never outward. They're metaphysical truths that are behind the outward. And then he says, some of the arifin, some of these people of this knowledge of ma'rifah, they say, "Man lam yakun lahu nasibun min hadha al-ilm, akhafu alayhi su' al-khatima." If you don't have a portion of this knowledge, I fear for you a bad ending in your life. So what does he say about this? Very interesting. وَقَالَ آخِرُ, he says, وَأَدْنَى نَصِيبٌ مِنْهُ التَّصْدِيقُ بِهِ وَتَسْلِيمُهُ لِأَهْلِهِ. The least portion of this knowledge is that you believe in it and its people. That there's people that have this knowledge. If you reject the awliya, right? Bad sign. أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. There are maratib, degrees of wilaya. There are degrees of wilaya. And wilaya is the special providence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given His entire creation providential care. All of His creation has providential care. Obviously, free will has an effect. And so you see a lot of evil and you see these horrible things. But it's not a sign that Allah's providential care isn't there. No, His providential care is there. That providential care, though, has degrees. And if you want more articulation of this, you can look at an essay that I wrote in the Dua al-Nasiri about that Allah's love is for His entire creation. His love is for the whole of creation. And this is from Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, who relates it to other scholars' understandings. This idea that God hates some of His creation, no. He has a mahabba amma and then a mahabba khasa. So when you see verses like, "Inna Allah la yuhibbu al-zalimin," Allah doesn't love the oppressors. They don't get His mahabba khasa. They get the mahabba amma. There's bughd, because Allah hates, but not in you can't look at it in an anthropomorphic way, like it's emotion. You know, that God's petulant and that He has love like we have love. That's a big mistake to do that. But Allah has created a creation out of His rahmah. And so to deny that rahmah, no. Rahmati wasi'at kulla shay. My mercy encompasses all things. And rahmah is from mahabba. Allah's mahabba encompasses all things. All things. But that specific love is for the people of wilaya, and that love intensifies with the intensity of the wilaya. And so as people draw near to Allah with iktisab, and this is important to note because nubuwwah is ghayr muktasaba, but the Prophet ﷺ has wilaya and nubuwwah. He has both. His wilaya, because people will say, well, how is the Prophet special if Allah chose him? It wasn't a choice. He has nubuwwah, and it was just given to him, and there's nothing that he can do about that, right? It's just given. He's ma'soom, he can't make mistakes. But he has wilaya. The Prophet ﷺ has, and that's why he said when his feet swelled from ibadah, and they said, the Aisha radiallahu anhu said, Allah has forgiven you what went before and what went after, and you're staying up so much in prayer at the night. He was older, that he was getting what they call venous stasis. So his feet were getting swollen from this. And he said, أَوَلَمْ أَكُنْ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا? Shouldn't I be a grateful slave? You see, that's his wilaya. Like he's acting, this is from him, this is his free will. The Prophet's free will is in the choosing of the good that he has. And so his nubuwwah and his wilaya, every prophet is a wali, but not every wali is a prophet, right? And this is why the prophet is over all, the one prophet is better than all the awliya. So the Prophet ﷺ he's rising in those degrees. And this is why, for instance, Musa ﷺ, he got angry, he broke the Torah when he threw down, the Ten Commandments, when he threw it down. فَلَمَّا ذَهَبَ عَنْهُ غَضَبُهُ, right? When that anger left, he picked them up again. But he was angry because he was a human being. So the prophets get angry, they have these human things, but they develop themselves in their lives here on earth while they're here. Their knowledge is different. Their knowledge at the beginning is not the same as the knowledge of the end. Qadi Iyad, for instance, says about the Prophet, when somebody said to him, Sayyiduna, he said, Bal Sayyidukum Ibrahim. No, your Sayyid is Ibrahim. He didn't know yet that he was over Ibrahim. That's one opinion about that. Because he's, Ana Sayyidu waldi Adam wa la fakhr. I'm the Sayyid of all of the children of Adam, and I'm not boasting. In other words, I'm commanded just to let you know this is my maqam. His maqam is over his father, Ibrahim alayhi salam. So there's an example of that. This is the inward realities. And this is what Mukashafa is concerned with for the awliya. And so he's saying the least that you should have is a belief in awliya. And every tradition has had these people. Every tradition that came from God, you will see that they had these people. And the early Christians had many, many miracles. People saw them with their own eyes. They had the gift of healing. They could lay on hands. People would be healed. They did miraculous things. This is well recorded, documented. And we know that there were miracles of the Jewish. The Prophet ﷺ gave us many examples of miracles that occurred at the hands of Jewish people. وَثْبِتًا لِلْأَوْلِيَا الْكَرَامَةِ وَمَنْ نَفَاهَ فَانْبِذًا كَلَامًا. Imam al-Laqani says in the Jawhara that assert the miracles of the saints, and whoever rejects them, reject him. Because they're real. So you should at least believe in them and then recognize that they're real. And then another one said you have there's two qualities that if they're not in a person, they won't have any portion of this knowledge. The first one is bid'ah. You have to have a sound belief, true belief, and you have to have sound practice. So if you have bid'ah in your belief or bid'ah in your practice, and then that's why it's important to learn fiqh so you don't fall into, because bid'ah, a lot of people use that word, they throw it around, but they don't really understand it. And I think in some of the other classes they might have talked about the different types. Shaykh Jamal, I think, is going to talk about that if he hasn't already, about the different types of bid'ah. So he's talking about bid'ah madhmuma, unacceptable. And also he said, من كان محبا للدنيا مصرا على هوى لم يتحقق به وقد يتحقق بسائر العلوم وأقل عقوبة من ينكره ألا يرزق منه شيئا. He said that whoever loves this world or follows his caprice, he'll never realize this knowledge, even if he realizes all the other knowledges. And the least of his punishment in rejecting it is that he won't be given any portion of it. And he says this is the knowledge of the Siddiqeen and the Muqarrabeen, of the sincere ones like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and the Muqarrabeen. This is the highest degree of wilaya, the ilmun mukashifa. So here's what he says. All right, so now you're going to get what the most that he can say, because he says this book is not about mukashifa. He said it's not something you put in books. It's something that's experienced. But what he's going to say here is pretty much all that he can say. He says, فهو عبارة عن نور يظهر في القلب عند تطهيره وتزكيته من صفاته المذمومة. It is this, what we call ilm al-mukashifa, is an expression that indicates a light in the heart that manifests in the heart once it's been purified and removed of its negative qualities. And that light will, he said, وَيَنْكَشِفُ فِي ذَلِكَ النُّورُ أُمُورٌ. So certain things are made clear because of that light. Just like light enables you to see things, that light in the heart enables you to perceive things. And so he says that he says فيتوهم لها معاني مجملة غير متضحة فتتضح إذ ذاك حتى تحصل المعرفة الحقيقية بذات الله سبحانه. And so before you really know it, that people can say things and they can have ideas of what these meanings are, just general ideas, but it's not clear to them. It only is clear when that true knowledge emerges about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وبصفاته الباقية التامات وبأفعاله وبحكمته في خلق الدنيا والآخرة, and understanding why he has done this world. You see, why he has done this. And this is why these people are in real submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a completely different way, because they understand what's really going on. They understand this hikmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in his creation, the wisdom behind these things. They understand these things. And so they don't get the confusion that people that don't have this knowledge get. They don't have the same level of confusion, because they see clearly that Allah is Rahman and Rahim. Everything he does is for the benefit of our species. And he doesn't oppress us. We oppress ourselves. That we have free will, and yet at the same time there's a type of determinism. And this is one of the paradoxes of our tradition, that Imam Ali radiallahu anhu said, somebody asked him about that, and he told about qadar and the ijbar and the takhir, free choice, and he told him, lift one leg. He lifted it, and he said, now lift the other without putting that down. He said, I can't. He said, it's between the two. So that's one of Allah's secrets. But we've been told if you delve too deeply in that, it'll confuse you. But we believe that we are responsible for our actions, and yet our actions are purely enabled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he says this also will give you an understanding of the nature of angelic forces and demonic forces, that there are light forces working in creation and dark forces. And we want to accrue the madad, the help of the angelic forces. Dhikr does that, knowledge and learning does that, but we also want to avoid the dark forces. And so there's protection that you have to do in order to avoid these dark forces. So this is very important. And these are the knowledges that come from that, because there are shayateen al-ins and there are shayateen al-jinn. There are demons that are of jinn and ins. وَكَيْفِيَّةُ مُعَادَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ الْإِنسان. And then how shaitan is fighting the human being, the techniques that these demonic forces use. You get an understanding of that. وَكَيْفِيَّةُ ظُهُورَ الْمَلَكِ لِلْأَنْبِيَاءِ. How the angels manifest to the prophets, and how wahi comes to them, and understanding the nature of the heavenly kingdom, the nature of the heart, and then also how the angels and the shayateen themselves are in a conflict. So these positive forces and negative forces are working also. معرفة الفرق بين لمة الملك ولمة الشيطان. Knowing the difference between demonic and angelic inspiration. Knowing what the akhirah is. Understanding Jannah and Nar. Understanding the punishment of the grave. What the sirat is. What the mizan is. The bridge. The balance. Also the hisab. The reckoning. كَفَى بِنَفْسِكَ الْيَوْمَ عَلَيْكَ حَسِيبًا. Today your nafs is your own accountant. Right? Because you're going to see your whole life. I mean, now we have reality TV, we have all these things. People didn't have any idea of having a replay of their lives. I mean, they were just told, you're going to see your life. It's literally, Imam al-Awza'i said, you will see your life moment by moment. Now we have We have what's called editing discretion here. It's called tawbah. So you can edit out things in this film that you're going to see. You don't want to see the director's cut, right? You want to see the edited version, right? Ya satar. So there's things you can edit out on this, but you are going to see your whole life. And this is what we were told. تُعْرَضُ عَلَيَّ أَعْمَالُ أُمَّتِي. The actions of my ummah are shown to me. Subhanallah. The actions of my ummah are shown to me. فَإِذَا وَجَدْتُ خَيْرًا حَمِدْتُ اللَّهِ. If I see good, I praise God. وَإِذَا وَجِدْتُ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ اسْتَغْفَرْتُ لَهُمْ. And if I see other than that, I beg forgiveness of them. لَا تُوَاخِذْهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. The Prophet said that there was one of the prophets covered in blood, and he said to the people that were punishing him, oh God, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And that's what he said at Uhud. Forgive my people, they don't know what they're doing. He asked forgiveness, one of the problematic hadith for some of the ulama. He asked forgiveness of them. In other words, that Allah would give tawbah and bring them into the fold. So those are all things that come from that. And then understanding these verses, وَإِنَّ دَارُ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. That the abode of the next world is the true life if they but knew that this life will appear like a dream compared to the next world. كَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ الْغِطَاءِ. We're going to remove, this is mukashifa in the next world. We're going to remove the veils. فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. Your sight today is piercing. In the akhirah, you're going to see, it's all but there are people here that experience that. They see the reality of the world. It gets unveiled for them. They see the sicknesses in the world. They see what people are doing to themselves. And their hallmark is compassion. They don't have ihtiqar. There's a lot of people that get unveilings, but they don't have the spiritual. They're not spiritual vessels for those unveilings. So they see the reality, the bovine nature of a lot of people, and they make fun of them. They mock them. They become comedians, and they laugh at them. They mock them. They see. They have intellects, and they look and they see how stupid we are as a species. And they use that as brunts for their jokes about people, the mustahzi'un, right? Because people are. We're a ridiculous species from one perspective. Other than the prophets and the awliya, we're a ridiculous species. The things we fight over, our pettiness, our stupidities, our dysfunctionalities, all of these things. We're the brunt of jokes. But when you have the prophetic heart, when you have the heart of wilayah, you have compassion for these people. You want to elevate them from their bovine reality to a spiritual reality, to take them out of their inhum kal an'am. They're like cows. No, they're not cows. They're created in a metaphysical image of reality. They're created in the form of a prophet, Adam alayhi salam. They have the potential to have the light of iman, of faith and ma'rifah in their hearts. So this is what he's saying. These are the realities. And so he says there's maqamat for all of this. And then he talks about how people involve themselves in fard kifayat, like learning fiqh and other things when they don't fulfill the fard ayn. So there's people that involve themselves, like they'll learn fiqh al-khilaf, but they don't know, so they'll learn about the differences of the fuqaha, but they don't know the basis of even one of the opinions. And so they put the cart before the horse. And he talks also about, he says, why do they learn the fiqh? Because they want to get, he said, they should be learning medicine. Because he said, we've got a lot of fuqaha, we don't have doctors. He's talking about in his time. He said, we have a lot of fuqaha. Why are they all going to fiqh? And they're leaving medicine to the Christians and the Jews. Why? He said, because they want the awqaf. They want to be in charge of the awqaf. You know, that they want to get, they're looking for, now they study medicine because that's the way you make money. Faqih, they're all poor now. So now they're all studying medicine. All our brilliant people in the Arab world and Muslim world, they're all studying medicine. No money in fiqh anymore. Yeah, it's the irony of. Yeah. And then he talks about wara', you know, but now this is really important here because here's what he says. Hayhat. You know, he says like, why don't they study medicine, right? He said, but they want to get in charge of the orphans' wealth. وَتَقَلِّدَ الْقَضَاء وَالْحُكُومَةِ and get into positions of like qadis in the government. وَتَقَدُّمْ بِهِ عَلَى الْأَقْرَانِ وَتَسَلُّطْ بِهِ عَلَى الْأَعْدَاءِ so that they can get ahead of their peers and then they can have some power over their enemies. Hayhat. Yeah. Good luck. قَدْ اندرس علم الدين بتلبيس علماء السوء. And this is one of his most important statements because I'm telling you, he said this 1,000 years ago. This religion has been corrupted by the talbis of the bad ulama. They've dressed it and made it something other than it is. And we have the same problem today. All of these people turning Islam into a political ideology, that it's just about worldly power. These people that have no spiritual essence, which is what enables them to cut off heads with impunity. Or take poor people that have been living for 1,000 years amongst the Muslims, unmolested, and then drive them from their homes. And what? They don't read the ayahs about being driven from the home? What type of people drive people from their homes? What kind of people are those that drive people from their lawful homes? So all of that is gone. And these people read the Quran, they read the hadith. The Prophet said it won't go down their throats. It won't get to their hearts. And he told us that these people were coming. And he warned us about them. And he said that they'll be eloquent. He said when you see them pray, you'll deem your prayer insignificant. He said when you see them fast, you'll think you're fasting insignificant. So there are people that do worship and it's all outward. There's no inward reality. This is what he's talking about. These are sick people. And this is what he was fighting in his own lifetime. And if he was alive today, they would be attacking him. Right? We can honor him now because it's 1,000 years ago, right? The only good saint is a dead saint. Right? When they're alive, their life is tribulation. His life was filled with turmoil and tribulation. You know, assassination attempts. SubhanAllah, his own teacher, there's several assassination attempts, you know, on these people. They had terrorists, they were called the Hashashun, you know, the assassins. They were at their time. His own patron, Nizam al-Mulk, one of the great kings he was a minister, but really one of the great rulers of our tradition. He was assassinated by one of these mad people. You know, this poor man that was here, the foreign minister, he's had several assassination attempts. Because they're not good enough. Right? Not just enough. Everybody's a zalim in their eyes, except themselves. They're not zalimun, but everybody else is a zalim. Right? I'm setting it straight. إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. That's what they always say. We're setting things straight. They're the mufsidun. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. They are the corruptors. They're the ones sowing corruption. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. If you say to them, don't sow corruption, إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. We're setting things right. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. No, they're corruptors. The Prophet ﷺ, they asked him, what do we do if we don't find it in the book and the sunnah? The Prophet said, Salu salihin, وَجَعَلُهُ shura bainahum. Ask righteous people, people that have, their nafs are purified. Ask those people. Don't ask the faqih. Right? Don't ask the faqih. In other words, this outward scholar that hasn't done anything to improve his own soul. Because they've got all the loopholes. Like they'll justify the most heinous crimes. They justify blowing up babies. Really. They use the hadith and the Quran to justify all their heinous crimes. They do. Because there's nothing there in the inward. There's no rahmah, there's no shafaqah, there's no musharaka wijdaniyah like the Arabs say. Imam Junaid, rahimahullah, said that once Sariya Saqati was his uncle and also his spiritual teacher, he said to him, when you leave my gathering, who do you sit with? And he said, al-Muhasibi, Harith al-Muhasibi. He said, فَقَالَ نعم خذ من علمه وأدبه ودع عنك تشقيقه للكلام ورده على المتكلمين. Take from his knowledge and his adab, but leave his some of the things that he says, his refutations of the theologians and things. In other words, don't get involved in his polemics. And then he said to him, ثم لما وليت سمعت يقول جعلك الله صاحب حديث صوفيا ولا جعلك صوفيا صاحب حديث. May God make you a traditionalist who happens to be a Sufi and not a Sufi who happens to be a traditionalist. It's a very important statement. أشار إلى أن من حصل الحديث والعلم ثم تصوف أفلح. And he meant by this, if you learn outward knowledge and then you learn the inward knowledge, you will have success. But if you learn the inward knowledge and then before you learn the outward knowledge, you're putting yourself in grave danger. خاطر بنفسه. Because it's easy to go astray. Shaitan can play lots of games with you. But he can't play games with an alim who's also an abid. He can't play games with them. But the abid who's not an alim, he can play games with them. And there are many hadiths to indicate that. And then he says, فَلِمَا لَمْ تُورِدْ فِي أَقْسَامِ الْعُلُومِ الْكَلَامِ وَالْفَلْسَفَةِ. Why aren't you mentioning dialectical theology and philosophy amongst these things, whether they're blameworthy or praiseworthy? And then he goes on about, and there's a whole section about kalam. And he said much of it is unnecessary. People shouldn't involve themselves. He actually wrote a book, إلجام العوام عن علم الكلام, preventing common people to get involved in dialectical theology. But he said it's necessary to fight obfuscations and these things. But he said some of it really doesn't have any relationship between the religion that's sound. But about philosophy, and this is important, he says philosophy is not a science in and of itself, but it has branches of science. One of them is geometry and mathematics. And this is what we call now theoretical mathematics, which is a type of philosophy. So he's saying that they're permissible. And also they can go under the fard kifaya, because people need to know these things. So he mentions that. And then he says the next is logic. وهو بحث عن وجه الدليل وشروطه ووجه الحد وشروطه وهما داخلان في علم الكلام. Logic, he argues, is a propedeutic knowledge. It's a necessary introductory science to all the sciences. And he considered it very important. He wrote 7 different treatises. He wrote 5 books on logic and a few treatises on it. So he considered it very, very important. He actually wrote one book. He removed all the traditional terminology just to make it a little more palatable to some of the fuqaha that didn't like the terminology of it. But he was a master logician, and it enabled him, obviously, to win all the debates that he got into. But he recognized the importance. He considered it to be like grammar for the mind. It's the rules of syntax for thinking. And then the ilahiyats, and he said this concerns metaphysics, theology, and he said they have a lot of different madhabs. He said some of it is kufr, some of it is bid'ah. He actually identifies in maqasid 20 positions. 3 of them he considered kufr, 17 he considered to be bid'ah. And then the 4th, and this is important, are the tabi'iyat. And these are what we would call today natural sciences. Because traditionally, natural sciences went under the category of philosophy. So natural sciences were part of philosophy in the past, which is why a lot of people look askance at philosophy because a lot of the philosophers were very wrong about their scientific conclusions about the world. Aristotle makes egregious mistakes. But because of their flaws in natural philosophy, they reject ethics, for instance, or logic. And these are mistakes. So he says something very important. بعضها مخالف للشرع والدين الحق. Some of these sciences go against the religious truths. And this is important because natural sciences are sometimes in real conflict with revelation. And this is why it's very important to be careful with these things, because natural sciences are attempts to understand the world. These attempts often involve cosmology. I'll give you an example. One of my sons was studying biology, and his biology teacher started talking about where everything's created from. In other words, he went from biology to cosmology. Instead of sticking with biology, which is the science of living things, he moved to the science of being, which is ontology, cosmology. This is a whole other branch. But philosophers like Dawkins is a biologist. But very often scientists, because they recognize how insignificant their knowledge truly is in relation to the big questions of existence, they often have this impulse or urge to engage in metaphysics and philosophy, even though they're not trained in these subjects. But they're clever people, they read books, and so they begin to espouse positions about the world, where it came from. Biology is very different. So this is important to note, that a lot of their cosmological conclusions are simply false. For instance, they don't believe in a creator God, most of these cosmologists. They say that if the Big Bang occurred, then there's probably alternate universes. So it's just a universe begetting another universe. That's a pure conjecture. And then they have magical formulas that they put on the board. You know, they write all those magical formulas. You see pictures of Einstein, and it's all magic, gibberish. You know gibberish? You know gibberish, where that comes from? It comes from Jabir bin Hayyan. Because when Jabir's books reached Europe, they couldn't understand them, so they called it gibberish. You know, that's true etymology. So they put up all these things, and of course you don't understand. There's only 15 people on the planet that can understand them, right? But he's saying, oh, here, this can happen in quantum physics. Things can just pop into existence. ما أشدتهم خلق السماوات والأرض ولا خلق أنفسهم. We didn't show them the creation of the heavens and the earth. We didn't even show them their own creation. You weren't around when your zygote got out of control, right? You weren't around. You weren't consciously experienced those mitotic cell divisions in the womb of your mother, right? Allah didn't even show you your own creation, and yet you're going to philosophize about His creation, right? He didn't show. We weren't there at the singularity. We weren't there at the Big Bang. It's all, these are conjectures. And this is the arrogance of human beings. Right? This is the arrogance of human beings, that the intellect can take you to all knowledge. And that's why they're waiting to discover these things. You know, like the biologists, they met with God, and he asked them what they were up to. He said, well, we've got rid of you. He said, how'd you do that? He said, well, we showed how you can get life without you. He said, well, how'd you do that? He said, well, first we take some cosmic dust. And God said, wait a second, hold on, get your own dust. So that's the difference between cosmology and biology, right? Where did matter come from? Even if you determine that life came from some comet that landed on Earth with some, right, in some, they call, what do they call that swamp? The primordial soup, right? And then also the whole, I mean, anyway, there's a lot of problems. So just he's pointing that out, that they have problems. And for Muslims, there's a difference between science and scientism. And I'll just show you from a Venn diagram for people, say Tunis students should know this, right? Ahmed, go. You did Venn, didn't you? Did you do the Venn diagram? So, you know, Venn diagrams are ways of understanding logical positions. But if you look at, here's the circle, this is truth. And then this circle is belief. Not all things that we believe are true, right? And there's a lot of truth out there that we have not discovered. But what we call knowledge is where truth and belief correspond. That's true knowledge. And when you get into epistemology, you have what's called justified true belief, right? So you have a proposition. Yesterday, Erdogan won the presidency of the AK party, right? Okay, so I believe that. My belief is justified because I was in Turkey. I saw all those blaring horns. I saw pictures everywhere of Erdogan, you know, running for president. And I read in the newspaper that he won with a 52% lead or something like that. So I have a justified true belief. So it's true, I believe it, and they correspond. And this is our traditional understanding of truth. Muslims adhere to what's called the correspondence theory of truth. It's no longer really accepted in Western epistemology. They don't believe it after Kant, and Kant called his whole revolution the Copernican revolution of epistemology. He turned everything upside down. People don't believe these things anymore. But we actually believe that God gave us intellects that correspond with the world he created, that there's a correspondence between our intellects and the world. And so there's a reality out there, and there's a concept of a reality that is in here, and it corresponds. It doesn't mean we can't be fooled. We can, and Allah has told us that. We can be fooled. We can have beliefs that do not correspond with reality, and we can be justified in believing them up to a certain point. Like, for instance, the geocentric model would survive for many, many centuries because it made sense. And we don't talk about earth turns. What a beautiful earth spin. You know, nobody says that. We talk about sunrise, moonrise. We don't say, oh, amazing earth spin this morning. Nobody says that. Why? Because you can't experience the movement of the earth. But we have enough, there's a lot of evidence, even though Stephen Hawking in his own book said there's still valid perspectives. He actually said that in the last book he wrote, that the Ptolemaic worldview, it's still a sound position. But there's a lot of evidence that it's not the way things are actually happening. Even though we don't experience it that way, we still experience a geocentric world. That's the way Allah has made it. So it's fitrah to experience a geocentric world, but that doesn't mean that that's what corresponds with reality. And the Muslims had an interesting distinction between what they called sharia and haqiqah. So traditionally they differentiate between sharia knowledge and haqiqah, reality. And the sharia, for instance, in sharia, God speaks to us from a geocentric perspective. He talks about the sun rising. When the sun reaches the 90 point, that's when we pray. So that's sharia. It doesn't necessarily mean it's, I mean, if we took all these modern sciences, we know that the sun, if you see it on the horizon, 8 minutes after it's set, it's still on the horizon, right? So if you went by haqiqah, it's already set, but you can't break your fast 8 minutes early. I just put something out there that's going to say, no, I think you can. Yeah. No, you can't break your fast 8 minutes early. Even though we know the sun's already actually set. But that's the time it took, 92 million miles away, the sun. That's the time going at 186,000 miles per second. That's the time it took the light to get here. It took 8 minutes. So the sun's already gone down. By Sharia, we ignore that fact. Right? That's considered pretty much factual by science. We ignore that. So that's very important that he points that out. And then he says that these physicists are like doctors, only the doctor is considered with the motion of the body and how it's sick and how it's well. Whereas they look at all bodies and look at it from the perspective of change and motion, right? Which is what calculus, I mean, this is the science of studying change and motion, acceleration, how things change as they move, right? And so he says, أما علومهم في الطبيعيات فلا حاجة إليها. He's saying there's no real need for it. Now, you don't need it to have a healthy society, but it improves and it also harms life. So it has benefits and it has harms. I mean, all these modern sciences have brought great benefit to human beings, but they've also brought great tribulations and in some ways brought us onto the brink of environmental disaster and psychological disaster. I mean, emotional meltdowns, people aren't doing very well. So now, and then he talks about that the Sahaba were ulama of the akhirah. They weren't ulama of the dunya. And he said the Prophet ﷺ he left behind all of these great knowledgeable scholars of the akhirah. And yet he said, if you look at the reality of it, here, he says here, that the Prophet ﷺ left alaf min as-sahabati radiyallahu anhu, kulluhum ulama'u billah. All of them were Gnostics of God. They all knew God. أثنى عليهم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And he praised them. وَلَمْ يكن فيهم أحد يحسن صنعة الكلام. They weren't good at writing. They didn't leave books behind. وَلَمْ يُنَصِّبْ نَفْسُهُ لِلْفَتْوَى. None of them set themselves up as muftis. In fact, he said there's only less than 10 that were giving fatwa. Out of all these tens of thousands of Sahaba, there's less than 10 that were giving fatwa. Al-Mukthirun are less than 10. Aisha is one of them. Really, they weren't going. In fact, when people came to them for fatwa, they would say, go ask so-and-so. They didn't want to answer. And he said, كان إذا سئل عن الفتوى يقول للسائل اذهب إلى هذا الأمير الذي تقلد أمور الناس. Go to this Amir, go to the ruler that's in charge of the affairs of people, and وضعها في عنقه. Put it around his neck. I don't want the responsibility. Put it around his neck. إشارة إلى أن الفتوى في القضايا والأحكام من توابع الولاية والسلطنة. This is a clear indication that these are the affairs of state. See, now we've got all these nutcases giving their fatwas, right? Out there. They're all giving fatwas. You know, go kill these people, go kill these people, go blow up these people. Who are these people? On whose authority? Right? Whose authority are you issuing these fatwas? But this is the problem when we have religious anarchy. We have religious anarchy now. He said they weren't interested in shuhra, in being famous. They weren't interested in winning arguments. He said, Abu Bakr his fame is not because he was the caliph. He said, we know about him because of a secret that God put in his heart. Umar radiallahu anhu, he said he was known for his siyasa, but look at his bounty and knowledge. When he died, Ibn Mas'ud said 9/10 of knowledge went with him. And somebody said to him, there are plenty of ulama and fuqaha. How could you say that? He said, no, he's taken knowledge of God with him. And then he says the fuqaha and the mutakallimun, jurists and theologians, and then the khulafa, the qadat, the ulama, he said they go into different categories. He said some of them, they actually desire God for their knowledge and their fatwa, and they're defending the sunnah. But other ones are just out for fame and notoriety and reputation. He said, not every action is knowledge. He said, the tabib, the doctor, can get close to God through his knowledge. If he's doing it for the right reason, if he's taking care of people for the sake of God. And he said, the sultan also has that. He can be pleasing to God. And he said, and so if you want to know the ways to get to God, there's 3 ways. Ilmun mujarradun, pure knowledge. And this is, he said, this is ilm al-mukashifa. And this is very interesting because what he's saying, and this is something modern Muslims have no understanding of this. It's the gift of presence. It's the gift of being. There are people that their gift is simply their presence. And in our tradition, we've always had contemplatives, people that have lived a contemplative life and have not been active in worldly affairs. One of my own teachers, Murabtar Hajj, he left the world. He actually fled a town. He was raised a Bedouin, but he fled a town because he thought there was so much corruption. And when I went to that town, I felt like I was in Medina in the 8th century. It was so amazing. Every night it was just, all you could hear was the Quran. Like Dawi al-Nahl, literally. I'm not romanticizing Gero. I saw it with my own eyes. Literally, we sat up at night, I used to go up after Isha, and we would go up on a sand dune, and there was no electricity, so all you could see was some candlelight in some of the houses. There was no electricity, it was all mud houses. There was no pollution, couldn't see any litter. The whole town, all you could hear was Quran. It was amazing. I cried several times just looking at it, just thinking, what is this place? That's gone. If you go there now, all the houses are made out of cement. There's garbage everywhere. There's all these telephone wires everywhere, satellite dishes everywhere, and at night they're all watching satellite TV. It happened in my lifetime. I saw it with my own eyes. Amazing. But Murabtar Hajj left that place because he thought it was too corrupt for him. And he went to a very hard place to get to. And when I got there, one of the first things he told me, he said, I put a barrier between me and the people of dunya. So he said, people of himma get to this place. But he's pure contemplative, but he taught. That's action in that he was a great teacher. And many, many people, literally thousands of people studied with him over because he taught for about 90 years, I think, close to. But his great gift was his presence, not just his knowledge, just to sit and be in the presence of a human being that had conquered his nafs and was a true servant of God. So that's one type of knowledge. وَعَمْلٌ مُجَرَّدٌ. And then pure action. وهو كعدد السلطان مثلا وضبطه للناس. I once went to Shaykh Sultan al-Qasimi's palace in Sharjah, and I was with another one of the du'at, and I've been in several of these type places, but there was definitely a palpable sakina there, you know. And I remember I said to the person I was with, I said, SubhanAllah, there's a sakina here, like tranquility. And he said, Na'am, dhikrullah. And I said, I don't think so. I think it's justice, because the dhikr of the sultan is being a just ruler, not being unjust. That's a dhikr of a sultan. You don't want a sultan that's, you know, Imam al-Ghazali, one of the sultans at the end of his life came to study with him. He said, no, you go and do your work. You're not supposed to be here. This is not, go and do your work. Take care of the poor people, help the oppressed people, do those things. That's what the sultan is supposed to be doing. So he's saying that people of action, that's a life. And they could do that. And then he said, and then murakkabun min ilmin wa amal. And he said, this is the highest. Because he said, huwa ilm tariq al-akhirah. This is really the best, those who join knowledge and action. And he said, these are the ulama wal ummal, the people that have knowledge. And Murabt al-Hajj is really from that, because he did that's what he did his whole life, was teach. And so he said, look at yourself. And who do you want to be in? Which hizb do you want to be in on the day of judgment? Which group do you want to be in? And then he goes on and he talks about the imams, and it's very important. Like he talks about all these imams, the 4 imams, and he shows how they were ulama of akhirah. They had secrets. They weren't these dry people. That they were people of deep knowledge of Allah. He begins with Imam Shafi'i, that's his imam. Then he goes to Imam Malik, and then he goes to Imam Abu Hanifa, to show that these, and then Imam Ahmad and Sufyan also. And so that's the second book that he does. And so, any questions? I spent more time on that because that's one of the core books to understand. The other ones, we're going to be able to get through them quicker, inshallah. What book do you recommend to learn the temperaments and the foods related to them? There's a good book called The Temperament God Gave You, because the Catholics still have this tradition, even though they got it from us. Because they translate all those Arabic books. Because Ibn Sina really developed this, and then it got into the Arabic tradition. I mean, his book was taught in Europe for centuries. So the Catholics believe in this temperaments. Can you please elaborate on what Ghazali says about how learning inward knowledge prior to the outward can lead you astray? Well, there's a lot of, Imam Malik did not like to be asked about gharib al-ilm. And the Prophet ﷺ, a man once asked him about the sa'ah, and he didn't say anything. And later he asked about, where's the man asking about the end of time? And the man said, it was me. He said, ماذا أعددت لها? What have you prepared for it? Right? In other words, that's more, we know it's coming. That we know. We have certainty about that. There's signs. The Prophet told us about the signs. But the real matter is the readiness is all, as Hamlet says. To be prepared for death, that's the purpose. Because the end of time really is the end of your life. And we don't know when that's coming. So the man said, مَا عَدَدْتُ لَهَا كَثِيرَ الصَّلَاةٍ وَلَا صِيَامٍ. I didn't prepare a lot of prayer and fasting. إِلَّا أَنِّي أُحِبُّ اللَّهُ وَأُحِبُّكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. He said, the only thing I have is love for you and love for Allah. And the Prophet said, الْمَرْءُ مَعْ مَنْ أَحَبَّ. A man's with the one he loved. That's why I don't underestimate mahabba, if it's real, if it's genuine. And Anas said, we were overjoyed with that more than anything we'd heard. So that's important. Any other questions?
Assalamu alaikum. You mentioned that traditionally a Shaykh was a psychologist.
Yeah.
I just want to ask, is there benefit in studying modern psychology and, say, NLP techniques to treat problems in our communities, like addiction, depression? And if so, is this like a fard kifaya?
There's definitely, I think, a lot of knowledge. Unfortunately, they've studied human beings so well. You know who hires psychologists are advertising agencies. So social engineering is real, and that came from really, they understand the self, but they have a materialistic understanding of the self, which is different from our understanding. So there's problems with one of the things that Muslims, that we have to do is we have to learn our tradition, and this is a double burden. This is what Imam al-Ghazali did. He not only knew his tradition, he also knew the other tradition. He knew comparative religion. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a multi-volume work on Christianity. And one of the things that he shows how the Bible predicted the Prophet. He showed it's a very interesting work. One of the things he says in the first volume of that work, he said, Muslims, when Christians ask them questions, they say, "La na'tika al-jawab illa sayf." The answer we're going to give you is the sword. He said, what is that? He said, that's the very thing they say about our religion. Like, that's why they don't want to join it. He said, you're just confirming their stereotype. He said, our religion, he said, ظهر بالحجة والبرهان لا بالسيف والسنان. He said, our religion spread with proofs and clarification, not with oppressing people with the sword. He said, what's wrong with Muslims? He said they should learn and discuss with people that our way is the way of persuasion. It's not the way of, if you don't like what I have, I'll just punch you in the face. What is that? Blood is no argument, Shakespeare says. It's no argument. You don't win an argument by killing somebody. We have this problem in our community. It's been acknowledged. Ibn Taymiyyah recognized it. And some of these people that call themselves his followers, are some of the worst criminals. What is the second of the two things if one has, good catch, because I didn't mention it, did I? Good catch. Kibr, arrogance. If you have arrogance, bid'ah or arrogance. He said these two things, the heart it's just not open to illumination. Can you repeat the three ways to get to God? What he said is that you can have pure knowledge, which is contemplation, where you really come to know God through contemplation, meditation, and then action. So you have an activist life. It has to be guided by knowledge, but you have an activist life. You're out doing things in the world, setting up orphanages, taking care of people, right? A governor, a ruler. Rulers, we want good rulers. This whole idea of, we want people like that, and we should pray for them and support them, like the Dawood Alu, Erdogan. They're politicians, and they're in complex societies. So there's always they're going to make mistakes. They're going to have problems. They're not going to please everybody. They're going to do things that might not have been the wisest thing to do. Sometimes you're going to have oppression. The Prophet ﷺ said that Najashi was a just ruler, and yet we know from the hadith there were people that were oppressed. One of the Sahaba mentioned that they saw a woman knocked over an old woman carrying a jar. And she got knocked over by some bullies. So in every country you're going to have people that are wronged, and then you're going to have people that have grievances, legitimate or perceived. There's people in this country that want secession, right? The The Kurdish people were victims of colonization because they were put into all these different countries, and the borders, before they moved very freely. Kurdistan was, but now there's problems because of these borders that were demarcated. Because the Ottoman Empire, which was not a Turkish empire per se, it was a multicultural, multi-ethnic civilization, and the rulers were not Turks. Towards the latter period of the time, they had more European blood than they had Turkish blood. It's a well-known fact. And then joining the two are people that have solid knowledge and people that are people of action as well. And those are people, that's the preferred position, to join the two. That's the Prophet's sunnah. But Awais al-Qarni retreated from the world. At the end of his life, he came out and he actually did do some things, but generally he was a contemplative. And then there are other people of action. Although he had a considerable amount of knowledge, he was a man of action. Somebody like Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. He's got his faults, but he was definitely a great man. Nobody can deny that. Time is up. All right. Alhamdulillah. So, inshallah, the next two will be quick. So we'll get through this, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. But I wanted you to really have a good understanding of what he was talking about. All right. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.